In a Google lab back in March 2026, a team of quantum researchers ran a calculation that quietly shattered a decade of false comfort, because the math they published revealed that the encryption guarding your online anonymity could be defeated by a machine far smaller than anyone had promised was safe. For years, security experts assured the world that quantum computers capable of breaking real-world encryption would require millions of physical qubits, a figure so massive that the danger felt like science fiction, something reserved for a future generation to worry about. That sense of comfort is gone now. This new research reveals that a quantum computer with fewer than 500,000 physical qubits, roughly 10 times smaller than earlier predictions, could crack elliptic curve encryption in a matter of minutes. And elliptic curve encryption isn't some niche academic concept. It's the actual mathematical foundation protecting Bitcoin, Ethereum, and huge portions of the private communication systems millions of people depend on every day. And if you're thinking this only concerns cryptocurrency, you're about to find out why Tor, the very tool journalists, dissidents, whistleblowers, and privacy-conscious people worldwide rely on to conceal their identity, is resting on that exact same crumbling foundation. Tor functions by wrapping your internet traffic in multiple layers of encryption and routing it through a series of volunteer-operated servers spread across the globe, so that no single node ever knows both who you are and what you're doing at the same moment. It's often called the onion router because your data gets stripped layer by layer as it moves from relay to relay, and by the time it reaches its destination, tracing it back to the original sender becomes nearly impossible using classical computing power. This system has shielded people living under oppressive governments, protected sources speaking with investigative journalists, and safeguarded everyday citizens who simply don't want every move they make online tracked, sold, and permanently stored. But the encryption methods underneath, specifically RSA and Diffie-Hellman key exchange, were built decades ago on a single wager that no computer would ever be powerful enough to crack the mathematical problems these systems rely on. Quantum computing was built from the ground up to break precisely that kind of wager, and researchers have now confirmed that this bet is collapsing faster than anyone anticipated. Consider how deeply people across the world have come to trust this illusion of invisibility. Human rights workers in dangerous regions use Tor to reach the outside world without revealing where they are. Investigative journalists build entire whistleblower protection systems on the belief that a source contacting them through Tor cannot later be traced and punished. Ordinary people living under intense surveillance use it simply to access news their government has censored, trusting that the encryption layers wrapped around their traffic are mathematically unbreakable for as long as they need that protection to hold. That's the quiet assumption everyone made without realizing it, that unbreakable meant unbreakable forever, not unbreakable until computing power eventually caught up. Quantum computing doesn't just chip away at that assumption, it completely rewrites the rules that assumption was built on. Here's where the real danger lies, and it has almost nothing to do with whether a fully working quantum computer exists today. Because the attack that should worry you most is already unfolding right now, silently, without you ever knowing it's happening. It's called Harvest Now, Decrypt Later, and it works exactly the way it sounds. Intelligence agencies, criminal groups, and state-level adversaries don't need a quantum computer today to start winning this fight. All they have to do is intercept and store your encrypted Tor traffic right now, sitting on enormous server farms packed with captured data, patiently waiting for the day a quantum computer becomes strong enough to break it open. That day used to feel like it was 30 years away. After the March 2026 findings, serious researchers are now suggesting the timeline might be measured in years, not decades. And every piece of anonymous traffic being harvested today, your messages, your searches, your identity, sits in a digital vault with an invisible countdown running. Like and subscribe if this is the kind of story that makes you rethink what privacy even means anymore, because what's coming gets a lot more unsettling. The people studying this threat have coined a term, a quantum-powered adversary. Someone who doesn't rely on classical brute force hacking, but instead wields quantum algorithms capable of solving the discrete logarithm and integer factorization problems that RSA and Diffie-Hellman depend on for their entire security model. Classical computers would need longer than the age of the universe to break strong RSA encryption through brute force, which is exactly why the system felt unbreakable for so long. Quantum computers don't play by those rules. Using something called Shor's algorithm, a sufficiently powerful quantum machine could theoretically unravel that same encryption, not over centuries, but in hours. Some projections even suggest that a fault-tolerant quantum computer with just over 4,000 qubits could break RSA 2048 encryption in roughly 10 seconds, compared to the 300 trillion years a classical supercomputer would need for the same task. That number should stop you in your tracks, because it means the entire foundation of modern internet security, the padlock icon in your browser, the encrypted messaging apps you trust, and yes, the layered anonymity Tor promises, was never built to withstand an opponent like this. Researchers have started calling the moment a cryptographically relevant quantum computer finally emerges, Q-Day. And while no one can pin an exact date on the calendar, the shift in expert opinion over the past year has been dramatic. Earlier surveys of cryptography experts gave RSA 2048 a meaningful chance of being broken within the next decade, with a much stronger likelihood placed somewhere in the 15 to 20-year range. But those estimates were made before this year's breakthroughs in both hardware and algorithmic efficiency, and every fresh calculation coming out of labs like Google's quantum AI division keeps pulling that timeline closer, never pushing it further away. What makes this shift so alarming isn't just the raw math, it's how consistently every new estimate has moved in the same direction over the past few years. No one in this field has published a paper claiming the threat is farther away than expected. Every single revision has pointed toward Q-Day arriving sooner, resource requirements shrinking further, and algorithms becoming more efficient at cutting through problems once considered computationally impossible. A separate research collaboration between Caltech, Berkeley, and a private quantum lab has been exploring an entirely different hardware approach using neutral atom quantum computers, a design some researchers believe could scale to useful sizes faster than the superconducting qubit systems companies like Google and IBM have spent years refining. Multiple independent hardware paths and multiple independent algorithmic breakthroughs are all converging on the same conclusion around the same time. That's not a coincidence worth brushing aside. That's a field accelerating in a way that should genuinely change how seriously people take this threat. So what does that mean for someone sitting behind a Tor browser today, believing they're invisible? It means Tor's anonymity isn't permanently broken, not yet, but it's no longer the guaranteed shield it once was. And here's the part that should genuinely worry anyone who relies on it for real protection. Tor's security was never designed to last forever the way people assumed. It was designed to outpace the computing power of its time. And that era of purely classical threats is coming to a close. Academic teams have already begun proposing redesigns of how Tor exchanges its encryption keys, incorporating something called quantum key distribution, a method that uses the physical properties of quantum particles to generate keys that cannot be secretly copied or intercepted without instantly revealing the intrusion. In theory, this kind of system could deliver what cryptographers call information theoretic security, meaning it would stay unbreakable even against an adversary with unlimited quantum computing power, because the protection comes from the laws of physics, rather than the difficulty of a math problem. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody in the privacy community wants to say out loud. None of these fixes are deployed at scale yet. Quantum key distribution demands specialized hardware, dedicated quantum channels, and infrastructure that the current volunteer-run decentralized Tor network was never designed to support. Retrofitting a system made up of thousands of independently operated relays scattered across nearly every country on Earth isn't something that happens overnight. And in the meantime, every day that passes is another day of Tor traffic potentially being harvested by an adversary simply waiting for the technology to catch up. Some newer research proposals try to buy time through cleverer methods, splitting a single session key into multiple independent encrypted fragments and routing each one through a completely different temporary path across the Tor network. So an attacker would need to compromise several separate circuits simultaneously just to reconstruct one key. It's a smart stopgap, but a stopgap is still not a permanent fix, and everyone working in this field knows it. Meanwhile, the hardware race is accelerating in ways that should make anyone paying attention deeply uneasy. IBM has publicly stated its goal of demonstrating genuine quantum advantage over classical supercomputers in specialized applications this year, with an even more powerful fault-tolerant quantum system targeted for 2029. Google's quantum AI division isn't sitting still either. The same team behind the March 2026 elliptic curve breakthrough continues refining algorithms that shrink the physical resources needed for real-world cryptographic attacks. Every reduction in required qubits, every improvement in error correction, every incremental algorithmic shortcut pulls Q-Day closer. And the frightening part is that these breakthroughs tend to arrive in sudden leaps rather than slow, predictable steps, meaning the world could wake up one day to headlines announcing that a working attack against real encryption has already succeeded, with almost no warning beforehand. Compare that pace to how slowly critical internet infrastructure typically moves. Entire industries still run on decades-old software because migrating away from it is expensive, disruptive, and tangled in legal and technical complications nobody wants to touch. Tor is even harder to upgrade quickly because it isn't owned by a single company that can push one update to every server overnight. It's a decentralized network built from thousands of independently run relays operated by volunteers across nearly every country on the planet, each running their own hardware, their own software versions, and their own update timelines. Coordinating a fundamental cryptographic overhaul across a network like that is nothing like updating a banking app. It's closer to replacing the plumbing in every building of a city at once without ever shutting off the water. That mismatch between how fast quantum computing hardware is advancing and how slowly decentralized privacy infrastructure can realistically adapt is the single biggest reason experts are sounding the alarm now rather than waiting until Q-Day actually arrives. There's also a psychological trap woven into this whole conversation, and it's worth calling out directly, because plenty of voices online will insist this is all overblown, that Q-Day is still comfortably decades away, and you shouldn't lose sleep over quantum computers. Some of that skepticism is fair, since building a fault-tolerant quantum computer with enough stable qubits to reliably run these attacks remains an extraordinary engineering challenge, and critics are right that headlines chasing quantum fear often exaggerate timelines for clicks. But the danger with Harvest Now, Decrypt Later attacks is that they strip away the comfort of a distant timeline entirely, because the attack doesn't require the quantum computer to exist today. It only requires your data to be captured today and decrypted whenever that computer eventually arrives. If you're a journalist protecting a source, an activist organizing under an authoritarian government, or anyone whose safety depends on anonymity lasting years rather than months, a threat that materializes in 10 or 15 years isn't some distant abstraction. It's a countdown clock already running against you right now. It also helps to understand why elliptic curve cryptography being vulnerable matters so much for the privacy world specifically, beyond just cryptocurrency. Elliptic curve algorithms are valued precisely because they deliver strong security with relatively small key sizes, making them efficient enough for fast-moving systems like secure messaging, mobile authentication, and yes, layered anonymity networks like Tor that need to constantly generate new encryption keys as traffic bounces between relays. That same efficiency, the very thing that made elliptic curve cryptography so widely adopted across the privacy and security world over the last 15 years, is exactly what the March 2026 research targeted, demonstrating that the mathematical shortcuts quantum algorithms exploit apply just as effectively to these smaller, faster key systems as they do to older, bulkier ones. In other words, the system's privacy tools chose specifically because they were modern and efficient turned out to share the same fundamental weakness as the older systems they were supposedly improving on. None of this exists in a vacuum either, because every year that passes without a coordinated global response to this threat is another year where more sensitive data gets swept up and archived by whoever is patient enough to wait for the decryption key to eventually surface. Encrypted medical records, legal communications, government cables, corporate trade secrets, and yes, anonymous political speech routed through Tor. All of it is potentially being vacuumed up right now by adversaries who understand something most casual internet users don't. Patience is the only tool required to eventually win this fight. The technology to break the encryption doesn't need to exist the day the data is captured. It only needs to exist eventually. And given how consistently every research breakthrough has pushed that eventual date closer rather than further away, patience is looking like a winning strategy for whoever is willing to play the long game. This is exactly why the conversation around post-quantum cryptography has exploded over the past 2 years, with governments, tech companies, and privacy-focused developers racing to migrate critical systems toward encryption algorithms specifically designed to resist quantum attacks. Some privacy-focused email and communication services built specifically for the Tor network have already begun implementing post-quantum cryptographic protections on their own infrastructure, layering on quantum-resistant defenses while the broader Tor protocol works through its much larger and slower redesign process. It's a patchwork response for now, individual services making their own moves rather than one coordinated overhaul, but it shows the privacy community isn't standing still while this threat approaches. Governments are treating this with a seriousness that tells you everything about how real the threat actually is. National standards bodies have already finalized new post-quantum cryptographic algorithms meant to replace RSA and elliptic curve systems across critical infrastructure, banking, and government communication. Financial institutions holding decades' worth of sensitive transaction data are quietly beginning multi-year migration plans because the encrypted records they're protecting today need to stay secure for 10, 20, sometimes 30 years into the future, which means the harvest now, decrypt later threat applies just as much to a bank's archived records as it does to a dissident's anonymous message sent through Tor. When organizations with virtually unlimited resources are treating this as urgent enough to spend years and billions of dollars migrating away from current encryption standards, that alone should tell casual internet users everything they need to know about how seriously this threat is being taken behind closed doors, even while most public conversation online still treats quantum computing as a distant curiosity. There's another layer to this story that rarely comes up outside specialist circles. Who actually benefits from being first to a working quantum attack? A capability like this isn't something a government or intelligence agency would announce the moment they achieve it, because the value of a working quantum decryption tool comes entirely from the element of surprise. The instant an adversary reveals they can break widely used encryption, every target in the world immediately switches to quantum-resistant alternatives, and the advantage vanishes overnight. That means the most dangerous version of this story isn't a public headline announcing Q-Day has arrived. It's a quiet capability sitting inside a classified program somewhere, being used selectively against high-value targets for months or years before anyone outside a small circle even knows it exists. If you're relying on anonymous communication for something that truly matters, waiting for a public announcement before taking quantum-resistant precautions may already be too late. If you strip away the technical jargon, what this story really comes down to is a race between two clocks, and right now nobody knows for certain which one will win. One clock is counting down toward the day a quantum computer becomes powerful enough to shatter the encryption protecting anonymous communication as we know it. The other clock is counting down toward the day privacy infrastructure like Tor finishes migrating to quantum-resistant defenses capable of surviving that exact attack. For years, most people assumed the second clock had all the time in the world, decades of breathing room before quantum computing became a real-world threat instead of a laboratory curiosity. The events of March 2026 shattered that assumption, showing that the resources required for a real attack are shrinking far faster than the defenses are being built. And that widening gap between how fast the threat is accelerating and how slowly critical infrastructure moves to protect itself is exactly what should concern anyone who has ever trusted anonymous browsing to keep them safe. None of this means you should panic and assume every message you've ever sent through Tor is instantly readable tomorrow morning, because a working, large-scale quantum attack against real-world encryption hasn't been demonstrated yet, and serious engineering obstacles still stand between today's quantum computers and machines capable of reliably running these attacks at scale. But it absolutely means the old assumption that anonymity built on RSA and Diffie-Hellman encryption would simply last forever because no computer could ever break it is no longer a safe bet to make. The ground beneath digital privacy is shifting. The timeline keeps shrinking with every new research paper, and the systems people depend on for real-world safety are only just beginning to adapt to a threat that used to feel like fiction and is quickly becoming a countdown clock nobody can stop watching. So, if you made it this far, you now understand something most people using Tor every single day have no idea about, that the very technology promising to make them invisible online is quietly racing against a mathematical clock that ticks faster every year. Like and subscribe if you want to stay ahead of stories like this before they hit the mainstream headlines, because the gap between what quantum computers can already do and what most people assume they can do is closing faster than almost anyone in the public conversation is willing to admit. Drop a comment telling me whether you think Tor and the broader privacy ecosystem will actually finish migrating to quantum-resistant encryption before Q-Day arrives, or whether the harvest now, decrypt later threat has already quietly compromised more anonymous communication than anyone realizes. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with this channel, because this quantum encryption race is only just getting started, and the next major breakthrough could rewrite everything you think you know about online anonymity overnight.